Welcome to Capital City News, your source for staying informed and engaged with Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Brian Young with Salt Lake City TV. For our episode today, we spoke with Victoria Petro-Eschler, the new council representative from District 1, about the latest COVID spike and how we can keep ourselves and each other safe. Our History Minute is about classic silent film star Buster Keaton and his time in Salt Lake City. But before we get to those, it's time for our legislative update, our look back, and our look ahead.
At its January 11th meeting, the City Council heard updates from the administration on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness, and crime trends, received briefings on the upcoming process of redistricting, the city's water supply and watershed, and the city's annual financial report. At its January 18th meeting, they finalized their fifth budget amendment of the fiscal year, which includes funds for low-income senior and veteran housing. To learn more, visit slc.gov/council. Mayor Mendenhall and members of the City Council held a press conference encouraging folks on the West Side to be COVID safe by wearing masks and getting vaccinated, especially in light of the unprecedented surge of COVID-19 in Utah.
Please take care of each other. This is about our community.
For more information about getting vaccinated, visit thisisOurShot.com. Mayor Aaron Mendenhall, City Council members, Human Rights Commissioners, and Racial Equity and Policing Commissioners gathered for a panel discussion on Martin Luther King Jr. Day to discuss changes in human rights efforts and policies over the years and the future of equality in Salt Lake City. You can watch the entire panel on our YouTube page.
The best way to defeat COVID-19 is by getting vaccinated and ensuring those around you are also vaccinated. Vaccines for COVID-19 are now available for kids 5 to 11 years old. To set up your child's appointment, visit the Salt Lake County Health Department website at slco.org. Remember, one of the best ways to help prevent winter inversion this season is to cut down on your vehicle emissions. Walk if you can, chain your trips together to cut down on unnecessary trips, and be sure to turn your key and be idle-free. To learn more, visit slcgreen.com.
For our interview this week, we spoke with Council Representative Victoria Petro-Eschler from District 1 about the COVID spike and how we can keep ourselves and each other safe.
The West Side has been on the front lines of this crisis since it began. When we all initially went into quarantine, so many of our people over here on this side proved that they were the heartbeat of the city. They continued going to the jobs at the meatpacking plant. They continued to stock our grocery store shelves. They continued to work those jobs cleaning hospitals and as first responders. So we've never really had a reprieve from this. We've always seen the high numbers. Now it's particularly concerning because we're kind of all exhausted and the supports are starting to dwindle. And so taking care of each other, not just from a health standpoint, but also from a support standpoint over here is just incredibly important in ways that we can't articulate, even though it's always been important because we've always had the depth of it thrust upon us.
Can you tell me about the event that the council held not too long ago to really encourage residents in your districts and really citywide, but not just the West Side? Tell me about that event and what caused that need.
Councilmember Pui called me one day and said, this is our chance to do what we said we were going to come to do. We can speak to people in their languages where they are about how important this is. And so that's what we set out to do. I get really frustrated. It's pretty apparent that the people who are inclined to be vaccinated or to participate in public safety measures, they're doing it. Now it's a persuasion issue, persuading people that it's important that they're being heard. And so I get kind of frustrated when people on my side of the city say things like, I don't want to get vaccinated because if I have a reaction, I can't afford 2 days off from work, and us to just throw a statistic back in their face and say, well, you're 70% more likely to survive. Those numbers don't mean anything. So the goal of the event was to speak to people, not just in the verbal language that they speak, but then also in the heart language that they speak, to let them know that we hear you when your grandma's saying sana sana and trying to do some home remedies, but the vaccine is important too. Getting boosted is important too. That wearing masks is important too. That we have to do this together. There's no I in getting to the end of this. It has to be together.
What measures are the city taking, and how has that changed since your event?
So I have always been incredibly thankful for the protections that the administration has offered us. I'm the mom of 3 young kids in a Title I school over here. And in particular, that mask mandate was a show of courage and was a protection to not just my kids, but to my neighbors. The difficult thing is that we're at the point in the pandemic where changes are not easy to come by. People are pretty well entrenched. It's become politicized in certain areas. Other areas, we just have fatigue over dealing with it. So trying to get any movement at this point does feel Herculean. The hope is that by adding my voice and the voice of Councilmember Pui, we're able to inject a little bit of familiarity to those who might be receiving the message so that it hits in a different way, and maybe we can have a more successful persuasion and dialogue moving forward.
Why are more local voices sort of more impactful and more important on these issues than voices higher up the food chain?
So I feel like District 1 and 2 really demonstrate why this is so important. We are unique demographically, socioeconomically. Our history is this interesting thing. I mean, we face barriers that other people don't, like, we get blocked in by trains regularly. That just doesn't happen anywhere else. The uniqueness of our situation means that local control is so incredibly important. The administration is able to talk to voices like ours who live here, who have children in the schools here, who run businesses here, and understand what it's really like on the ground and make decisions that are reflective of our unique needs. Those who are working further up, I'm so thankful for the work that they do, but it's just not their purview. Us being here and knowing the visceral needs, that makes us the right locus of control for making decisions.
For residents of the West Side, for residents across Salt Lake City, what can they do to help as this pandemic continues on, into its second year? What can they do to help mitigate that and make sure that we're protecting our neighbors? We
need to fight back the fatigue and the weariness. And we need to, number one, if you're not vaccinated, get vaccinated. You can trust this vaccine. And if you have questions, there are any number of people who will answer your questions about them. Your concerns are valid, but we have the responses to those concerns. Number 2, if you're vaccinated, get boosted. Protect yourself from this latest, most contagious variant and your neighbors. And number 3, go back to the masks. I know they're no one's favorites. My kids do not love wearing them, but they are proven statistically to improve outcomes. And so it's a very kind and loving thing we can do to just put that on our face and to go about our business.
It's time now for our History Minute.
Known as the Great Stone Face, Buster Keaton was one of the most important and influential silent stars in the history of cinema. Starring in classics like Steamboat Bill Jr., Sherlock Jr., and The General, he made a name for himself with elaborate stunts and comedy. As one of the biggest stars of the silent era, he struggled to stay on top in an era of sound, though he still produced incredible work in that era. After a time, he appeared to be forgotten, and ended up working as a commercial pitchman and starring in industrial films. One such industrial film brought him to Utah in the summer of 1965. The Evans Advertising Agency brought Keaton to the farms of Winder Dairy to shoot a film called The Fall Guy for U.S. Steel. There are no known copies of the film to exist, but its production was well photographed by local newspapers eager to catch a glimpse at the aging star. Keaton's wife Eleanor, who traveled with him wherever he went, told the newspapers that they enjoyed Salt Lake City very much, and she and her husband had never seen a more picturesque dairy. They spent time sightseeing before heading off to their next assignment. Keaton passed away just 8 months after his trip to Salt Lake City at the age of 70, remembered always as one of the first stars of cinema, a certified genius of the medium.
That's it for this week's episode of Capital City News. Remember, the best way to stay engaged is to stay informed. You can do that by following us on social media at SLC.gov, subscribing to us on YouTube, or watching us on Channel 17. So, reporting in from the Three Creeks Confluence, I'm Brian Young.